The Sports Source is brought to you by Fast Frame, with exciting Vol sports prints now available.
You are watching East Tennessee's first and only year-round sports talk show on television. This is The Sports Source with your host, John Pennington.
Good Sunday morning and welcome into the Sports Source. Happy to have you with us. We have a full show. Tennessee scrimmage last night. We'll talk a little bit about that, the word coming out of Neyland Stadium. We've also got tons, it's probably 20 topics in this 1 hour show, so we need to get into it, but we also have a major announcement coming up later in the show that you want to stick around for. Tennova Healthcare brings you this first segment of our show. Next month will be Prostate Cancer Awareness Month, and men 1 in 6 of you will have to deal with that disease. Ask your doctor about a simple PSA blood test. And if faced with a cancer challenge, trust the folks that my family trusts. Tennova Healthcare, absolutely the best. I went through prostate cancer. I turned to Tennova. They saved my life. I can't give you a better recommendation than that. Tennova.com to learn more. All right, I want to welcome in the next group, or the first group of panelists today, the only group of panelists today. We have Bob Hodge, we have Mike Strange, we got Josh Ward down there, and Chuck Cavaleris back with us. All right, Tennessee held a closed scrimmage last night. You remember when the Saturday scrimmages were the ones that were kind of open, you could get in and watch the scrimmage? Okay, well, closed scrimmage. The biggest word to come out was that the defense won the day. A number of players got kudos, Khalil McKenzie, Nigel Warrior, Kyle Phillips, but the defense seemed to set the tone for the scrimmage. We're basically 2.5 weeks from the opener, all right? That's the age-old question. Defense look good. Does that mean the defense is good or the offense is bad? Does it concern anyone that your defense looked better in the scrimmage yesterday? Would you prefer to hear that the offense looked better? I think I like what I hear with the defense looking better. Anyone?
If I got to pick one, I want the defense to look better because it's the old adage. If they can't score, they can't win. And so if somebody's got to be dominant and you got to pick one or the other on your team, I'll take a dominant defense.
Yeah, I don't think it's a concern.
Well, when's the last time you went into a season, where Tennessee's defense was, getting more hype than the offense? And I'm not saying that's the case, but I think it's good news that your defense looks good.
Certainly not since the Sinceri year. That's Josh, your thoughts on if the defense really did win the day. Is that a good thing, bad thing? How do you view that? Or do you just say, it's a scrimmage, dude?
Well, and you can say that too. I would have been surprised if it were reversed. If the offense came out and you could say, hey, big news for the offense, but then wouldn't we say, wait a minute,
The defense is supposed to be a little bit ahead. What has gone wrong? You have more depth and speed in the secondary that's getting talked about, more depth up front on the defensive line. And Don Mahoney, the offensive line coach on Friday, one of his big questions was, are we physical enough on the offensive line? Are we deep enough as well? Maybe that is still an issue that needs to get figured out when you're going up against a defensive line for Tennessee that does look so good.
Yeah, and let's don't forget, sometimes it's kind of set up that way on how they do the scrimmage and what they do. And I like that. I mean, that's kind of like in spring training baseball. The pitching's ahead of the hitting, and it should be this time of year.
All right. One reason I think it's a good sign, too, is this offense averaged 31 points per game in SEC contests last year. Now, we can sit there and say, yeah, but they got 50 against this team. I get it. But 31 on average against your 8 SEC foes, you've got a pretty good offense. Mm-hmm. So if your defense is winning the day, I think that's a pretty good sign that you might be set to live up to the hype on defense, which, again, is what wins championships more than offense. All right. Tennessee played around with the secondary a bit this week. I know you've been at practice this week, Josh Ward, for 990 and 99.1, free plug. Rashawn Golden moved back to nickelback a little bit. Last year, before he got hurt, looked like he was going to be the nickelback. They've used him at safety so far, and then they moved him to nickelback. Micah Abernathy and Nigel Warrior showing up pretty well. They're getting some time at safety, so they may shuffle there on the secondary a little bit. Tell me what you saw and what you think about that.
Yeah, with Todd Kelly being out for a little bit, getting some rest as a few guys are, that's allowed Bob Shoop, he's very involved with the safeties to kind of move some guys around and see what he likes best. And Bob Shoop, Tennessee's defense coordinator, was asked about Rashawn Golden. What do you like about him at safety versus nickel? He said it really doesn't matter one versus the other. He's trying to find the best guys. I think one of the biggest strengths for the secondary has been that guys can move around. Abernathy is one of those guys as well. And Bob Shoop called Abernathy the most consistent defensive back of practice so far. So I think that has been one of the biggest topics. Guys are moving around to different spots.
Yeah, and if you're looking, it's not a situation, doesn't sound like, where, oh gosh, we've got a hole, we've got to fill, so let's move him here. Sounds like you've got some young guys that are stepping up, which enables you to say, all right, how can I get the 5 best guys out on the field? All right, let's move Galden here, and we can put one of these 2 back here when Kelly comes back. To me, it sounds like a positive the way they're moving them around.
Well, I think listening to that too, it not only sounds like a positive for this year, but not wanting to jump way too far ahead. One of the concerns is the players you're losing this year for next year. Okay, now you've got all these young guys that you're trying to figure out a way to get them more involved. So, I mean, I think that's not only a positive thing going into September, it's a positive thing going into seasons that we haven't even talked about yet.
Yeah, I mean, usually you're trying to cover youth. You'd rather have veterans than youth. If you've got some youth over there that you're finding ways to work into the system, I think that is a positive.
And don't you think potentially that's as talented as a group as Tennessee's had? I mean, when you look from, I think you've got like 8, 9, 10 players there.
Well, if Warriors half the player his father was, he's going to be a hell of a
I mean, exactly. And I think they're looking for somebody who can play the corner. Then all of a sudden, we want you to play nickel. That's going to maybe move you up in the rotation zone.
Let's talk about the offensive line. Last night, Brett Kendrick was held down. We'll talk a little bit about injuries in the next segment, but Brett Kendrick didn't get the start. It was Chance Hall at right tackle and Drew Richmond at left tackle. When you look at the offensive line, it seems to be more and more that Richmond is going to be the left tackle, and it's going to be Hall probably at right tackle, with Kendrick being the guy who can play any of those positions all up and down the line, and he's kind of your plug-and-place guy. How comfortable are you with that offensive line? We look at last year, they ran for an incredible amount of yardage, but we're going to tell you a little bit later, there was a coach in the SEC who didn't say great things about the offensive line. They ran for great yardage, but there were times where it was the running backs making individual plays. How much of a step forward are you expecting this line to take with 4 out of 5 guys back, basically?
Big
step forward, you think?
I think it is good. It needs to take
needs
a big
to be,
step.
but do you think it will be?
I think it will be a pretty good size step forward. I think as you looked at them towards the second half of the year last year, or the final third of the year last year, even though the competition wasn't Alabama, it wasn't Oklahoma, it wasn't Florida, they got better. And then you go into a bowl game and they got dominant against Northwestern. And what did Northwestern do better than anything else? They supposedly played defense pretty well. So I think, yes, they should take a big step forward.
You guys anticipating a big step for the offensive line?
I think you have to. I mean, it's that same old thing. I mean, barring injuries to at least 2 key players and what you have coming back, I think you should.
I don't know that necessarily a year older is always a year better. But I will say this. From 2 years ago to last year, they took a step forward. I think they'll take a step forward. I don't know if they're going to take a major step forward. You guys' thoughts?
I think it's a big difference for older being better. I think that does apply maybe more at the offensive line because it's such a physical position and growing into, maturity into that. And you said earlier, do you have concerns? Yeah, I think anytime you got a freshman starting at left tackle and 2 other guys that played some as freshmen last year, it's not a question of talent, just experience.
So I was just going to say, the one area with the offensive line, one other thing that works about a year older, year better, that is such an important position. I mean, all 5 positions in terms of communication and just having that sixth sense of what the guy next to you is going to do and having faith in him to do his job. So I guess that would also play into what you're talking about.
Just real quick, when the coach says they need to get more physical, that is a concern. That's always a concern about your offensive lines when somebody says, we're just not physical.
Yeah, I think with personnel, the offensive line would be my biggest question mark on Tennessee's team. And they do have more options now than they had 2 years ago. They're in a much better place there. But we're also talking about Tennessee trying to win a championship, and that comes back to the offensive line.
Well, and the one thing you continue to hear about Drew Richmond is good pass block. Is he ready to be a dominant run blocker in the SEC at this point? So I think that question will be answered probably by the time they play Virginia Tech and Florida and they go up against big-time programs. We'll have a better clue. All right, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about Tennessee injuries, any reason for concern at this point, as well as Tennessee's new slogan, Own It. We'll discuss. Come on back.